Hello, welcome everyone. We are live. You have to mute this, by the way. We are live and kicking off our webinar on self-reflection very shortly. In the meanwhile, if you would like to introduce yourself, which country you're from, you can just mention in the chat box the country and what brings you here. So maybe 1 or 2 words on why you're here at this webinar. And we'll just wait a few minutes for some more people to join and then kick off. I'm just going to try and share my screen with you all. Hopefully there's no issues with this. Yeah, so hopefully you guys can all see the screen. As mentioned, we'll just wait a couple more minutes for people to join, and feel free to drop in your country and any kind of intentions or things that bring you here in the chat box while we wait for others to join. Hey Dharma, hey Jesa, hey Courtney, great to have you guys all on. Hey Peter, lovely to see you. Great, so we're going to get started and others can join as and when they do. So firstly, welcome everyone. It's great to have you all joining from around the world for this webinar. By way of introduction, so this webinar is hosted by the Global Changemakers Network. And I know some of you on here are part of the network and others may not be so familiar with it. So Global Changemakers is a youth network comprising of several hundreds, potentially thousands of young social entrepreneurs, social activists, all who share a passion for improving the state of our world, addressing social and environmental issues in some form. The network was started a number of years ago by the British Council. It's now an independent organization. And one of the initiatives that was started more recently is a webinar series where different changemakers can come and share insights or reflections or kind of ideas or skills with the wider community. And so this webinar is part of that series. As mentioned, it's on self-reflection, which is something I'm personally very passionate about, have been practicing for a number of years, and very grateful to be invited and part of the session with you all. So by way of quick introductions, so my name is Shruthi Vijayakumar. I am currently based in the UK, doing my MBA at the University of Oxford. Really passionate about the role business can play in tackling social environmental issues. You can see a little picture there of myself with my family in Oxford. I grew up in New Zealand. That's that picture of the dude on the mountain, initially from India, born in Botswana. I've worked in a few different capacities, most recently as a leadership coach and facilitator. So really also care about developing people and their potential. And I think self-reflection is a big part of that. The picture on the top right is one of many social environmental projects I've been a part of. This one involved building rafts of plastic bottles and taking them around to New Zealand to raise awareness of plastic pollution. So that's a little bit about me. Before we get stuck in, I wanted to invite you all just to take a moment to ensure that you are really present and ready for the session. So if you need a cup of water, go and grab it. If you need to relax in your seat, feel free to do so. I invite you to take a couple of deep breaths as well. Just a deep breath in and out at your own pace. Another deep breath in and out. And if there are any thoughts or worries, things you've got to do, leave them away just for the session. If there are notifications that are distracting you, if there's another window open with Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, I invite you just to close it for the next hour or so and really to be present and here for the session. If you need to go, that's totally fine. But while you're here, I think being as present as possible will enable you to get the most out of it. So in terms of our agenda, we're going to kick off with a little bit around why self-reflection is important. In the context of reflection, what actually matters to us, what's important to me, to you. The bulk of this is going to focus on daily reflection, which is really the pillar of my practice. We'll talk a little bit about the foundations of growth, applying this with teams and projects, and then have about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, save them up. Feel free to drop them in the chat box. And we'll answer them at the end, and would love to give you guys some space for that. I think also just worth mentioning that a lot of this webinar is based on my personal practice and things and tools that I've experimented with and learned over the years. It's by no means a right way or the only way, but it's just a personal sharing that I'd love to give to you guys. So feel free to take and leave what's helpful or what's unhelpful. If you've got your own practices or things that you find really helpful, do share them in the chat box as well so we can learn from each other. This is very much a space, not just for me to share, but for us to learn together. So really take what you can, feel free to share, and feel free to ask questions and engage as we go along. So in terms of why self-reflection is important, I think for me there's lots of aspects, but the few that I wanted to call out, first and foremost, I found it a very valuable tool to develop self-knowledge. And understanding ourselves, I think, is the most important knowledge there is. What excites us, what energizes us, what our strengths and weaknesses are, what our triggers are, how we react or show up in certain situations, what fulfills us, what depletes us. All this kind of knowledge, I think, is really useful when it comes to wanting to do the work we want to do, have the impact we want to have, and just live a well-lived and joyful life. So I think reflection is a really powerful tool, both for knowledge and then also for change and for action, which we'll come to shortly. I found it personally really helpful when it comes through working through challenging situations, working through challenging people or relationships, and really improving myself in that. I find it really helpful in tracking progress, monitoring goals. There's another term that I'm sure many of you are familiar with called the growth mindset, which is basically this idea that our potential is not fixed, but we're all really capable of achieving more and doing more than we think we can. And I think reflection helps me get into this mindset of seeing myself as more than what I think I am and really pushing myself to be more and do more. And finally, a lot of my reflection happens in the evening before I sleep. It's a daily practice. And I find even just by putting things on paper and processing them right before I sleep, it's a really powerful way to clear my mind and go to sleep and have a much more restful sleep and better quality as well. So again, many more benefits, but these are just a few that I wanted to call out before we jump in. So I want to invite you all now to do a quick visualization. So if you can close your eyes and imagine that you are 80 years old. You are a beautiful old man or old woman. You look down at your wrinkly hands and you feel wonderful. You've lived a full, meaningful, great life, whatever that means to you. Maybe there's a few aches and cracks in your body, but for the most part, you're healthy, you're happy, life has been good. Now imagine you are going for your 80th birthday party. This is a big celebration of the life you've had, a time to acknowledge those that have made that possible and really to celebrate your life. And so imagine you show up at this party, there's your favorite music playing, there's balloons, there's your favorite food, and people from all aspects of your life, colleagues, people you've done projects with, there are family, there are friends, people from the community, beautiful collection of people that you really care about. And this party is going, and someone raises a glass and says, I want to make a toast to you. And first, it's some friends of yours that you've held for many years, and they share a little bit about the kind of person you were, the impact you had on them, the kind of life you lived. And following this, a number of short speeches happen from family members, from colleagues, from people in the community. And you're just feeling stoked, you're feeling humbled, you're feeling grateful, and really proud of the kind of life you've lived and the impact you've had. And I want you to now open your eyes, and if you've got some pen and paper, take a moment and just spend maybe 30 seconds to a minute writing down what are some of the key things you would want these people to say about you. What are some of the key aspects you would want to be remembered for? And this could be anything. It could be aspects about your character. It could be things you've done. Just take a moment, and if you guys are feeling brave, maybe even drop them in the chat box and share them with the rest of us. We'd love to see. But more than anything, it's a personal activity, and really would love you to think about, what are these people saying at your 80th birthday? So hold on to this. It's something you can continue to reflect on afterwards, and feel free to keep making a note. I do this kind of exercise once a year, and I find it's a really powerful tool to really connect with what matters most to me. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. One is with the 80th birthday. I actually find it more helpful to visualize my own funeral. It's a bit morbid. I know some people aren't such a fan of this, but I find death is quite a beautiful celebration. So either anchoring on an 80th birthday or a funeral. And how I normally do this is I think about the different roles I play in life. So right now, I'm a business school student. I am a daughter. I'm a friend. I'm a sister. I'm an entrepreneur and coach. And in all these different roles, who is it that I want to be, and what is the kind of impact I wish to have? So for example, as a business student, I want to be someone that was always present and fully engaged in the classroom, that was not distracted, that asked the challenging questions in the classroom, that pushed my peers to see more, that took the most and learned as much as I could, both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. That was very grateful, no matter how many assignments I had, for the opportunity to learn. So these are some of the things that I'd want to be remembered for, or really value as a business student. So in the same way, I normally work through each of the major roles I have and think about, who is it that I want to be, and what is it that I want to do. Then what I do is think about where I am right now, and how is it that I'm showing up now? Well, the reality is actually a lot of the time I'm distracted in my finance class and checking my phone and not fully there or not fully prepared. And there's many reasons why that might be the case. And in other aspects, I might feel, look, I'm doing a really good job of that. I really feel like I'm embracing the opportunities to learn outside the classroom. So this is a process to basically get a sense of who is it that I want to be, where am I now, and what's the gap? And how can I now reorient and get myself back on track? And this is where I feel reflection, both at an annual basis and through this kind of activity, but also a daily basis, is really powerful. So the analogy I love when thinking about this is that of the boat or the ship, or in this case, as you'll see on the slide shortly, a kayak. So think about a boat that is heading to a certain direction. And now if this boat or this kayak, as we see, shifts course by even 1 degree or 2 degrees right now, the final destination it will end up in 500 kilometers or in 20 hours from now, whatever the time, would be totally different than where it otherwise would have if it was 1 degree the other way. Even a 1 degree shift now can have a huge impact in the long run. And for me, self-reflection is really this way to reorient and to get myself back on track. This kind of funeral / 80th birthday exercise is a way for me to get a sense of what's my direction. And then my daily practice, my daily reflection, and my annual reflection is a way to shift my boat in the right direction and to ensure that I actually am going on track. And I found this has been really a powerful tool, both at the annual and at the daily level. An example is, a couple of years ago, I did this funeral exercise, and I realized the kind of relationship I wanted with my parents was one where I was really present, where I was giving them a lot of time, where I was really loving and caring and always there for them. And I realized the reality was that I was always busy, and despite living at home, was always out and always doing something and hardly spending time with them. And it was this exercise that helped me really acknowledge that gap and then do something about it. And from thereafter, I decided to have lunch with my dad, every 2 weeks in the city, and put in some very conscious efforts to spend more time, which had a significant impact on the relationship I had with my parents. And so in the same way, doing this practice, I find really helpful to just almost do a reality check and ensure that I am heading in the direction that I want to be. So I want to move into daily reflection now, which I think is really the pillar and the core of my reflective practice. This is something I started about 7 years ago in 2011 through a program called Love at Work, which is kind of like a self-improvement program that a number of dear friends and I do. I know some of you are on here today. And what this looks like for me is there's kind of 5 steps or 5 key pillars that I reflect on that I'll share with you in a moment. I reflect every night, and this could range from anywhere between 5 and 30 minutes, depending on how tired I am. I find I can't not reflect. It's become such a part of my day in the way that, eating and sleeping and, brushing my teeth is. So it's kind of a non-negotiable. If I'm really tired, it's just a quick one. But if I've got the space and there's a lot happening, it could easily range 30 minutes, sometimes longer as well. And then finally, I do this by writing. I used to write in a notebook, but I found in the last 4 or 5 years, it's been easier to write on my computer, simply because it's easier to sort and reflect back through old reflections, and it's easier to store rather than having stacks of notebooks. But really, I find writing is helpful. Some of you might find, speaking is helpful as well, and there could be other tools you use, but I find writing is really a core aspect of my daily practice. So step 1 of 5. This for me is celebrating the wins and really starting off by showing ourselves some self-love and really acknowledging what went well today. What did I do that was aligned with the kind of person I want to be? And this could be small things, it could be bigger things. It could be as simple as, look, I woke up in the morning as I wanted and I made time to meditate and exercise. Great. I'm hitting this kind of fitness goal. It might be I was in my class and I was really prepared and really engaged, and I feel like I learned a lot out of it. It might be I had a really hard conversation and I thought, I was really loving and went into it and did the best I could given the tricky situation. Whatever it is, I think it's really important to spend a little bit of time acknowledging what's going well. And if you're like me, I've really got an obsession with what can I do better? How can I improve? And there's always a tendency to rush into kind of what to change. But I think this is really critical, both to build our self-confidence, to build our own self-love, and also just to build momentum as well. And I find, having small wins and celebrating these wins is a great way to build momentum and encourage us to do more and be more. So this could just be, it could be a short activity, longer if you need, but I think it's really a critical and important part of the reflective practice. So having firstly acknowledged what went well, the next question, step 2 of 5 for me, is looking at, what are the areas that I want to improve? And this tends to be a bigger one for me. As I mentioned, I'm so focused on how to be better. And has a number of aspects to it. So the core or overarching question for me is really, when did I not show up as my best self? And again, what's directing all of these questions is that vision of what we have of who we want to be at the end of the day and what really matters to us, which for me emerges from that 80th birthday activity. So keeping that in mind, when have I not lived in alignment with that? When did I not show up as my best self? And this might look like these kinds of sub-questions, which you can see on the screen. Were there situations where I didn't speak my mind, where I felt uncomfortable? What was going on there? Why was there discomfort? Was I conflicted about a decision? Did I think one thing but say another thing? Why was there no unity there? Did I lack empathy in a situation? Was I not environmentally conscious in certain situations? Could I have been more loving and kind? And really, I think this is, there are many questions you could ask here. Here are just some examples. But the bigger thing is just to spend some time acknowledging, what are the situations where I haven't been my best self today? And for me, I find there are so many things that could come up here. And the key is just to pick 1 or 2 things, not to get caught up on all the 50 billion things I want to improve about myself to be this ideal self, but rather just what's 1 or 2 things. And with those 1 or 2 things, let's unpack them a bit. What were the drivers? why did that situation happen in the way it is? Was I influenced by someone? Was it a belief I held? And really digging into the whys beneath that. And once digging into the whys and the drivers, then thinking about, so what am I going to change? What's going to be different tomorrow? What's going to be different the next time I'm in this kind of situation? And this could be small or big. It could be any kind of thing. Kind of, if I think about examples where this has been helpful for me, one was simply wanting to have a better morning routine. So I wanted to sleep earlier, wake up earlier, and spend some good time in the morning, reading, exercising, meditating, and setting my day off to a good start. And there was a period where I found I just kept going to sleep late and waking up late and rushing to class or rushing to work. And so this practice was really helpful to make sense of, so why is the situation happening? Is it because I'm too tired and I'm not getting enough sleep and therefore I'm waking up late? Is it, technology that's distracting me? Do I just need some self-discipline to turn off my laptop and go to bed, even though there's work to still do? So really, I found this helpful to get a sense of, what's driving this behavior, and then putting in some new practices to change this. Deciding that I am gonna, sleep earlier, or ensure I exercise because that improves my quality of sleep, or put, better limits on the technology I'm using. I found this has been a really helpful way to track and progress and improve myself. Another example where this I found really helpful is dealing with difficult people. So one of my first managers was a really tough person I had to work with. And when I got into this job, I remember a lot of my colleagues were telling me, look, this manager is the guy you don't want to work for. He's a micromanager. He'll treat you badly. He's socially awkward. He won't understand you. You're going to have a bad time. And so when I got into this work, naturally, I went in with this quite negative mindset, and I found that everything everyone said was true. And, this manager was incredibly critical. He was always finding flaws in my work. I was in the office till midnight usually, and really having quite an unhappy time. And I remember over this period reflecting on this immensely in my nightly reflections and unpacking the situation. And it was through, initially the reflections were a bit of a rant about, all the things I was finding hard about him, but it was through this reflection that I realized, and through some of these questions, that really my mindset and my attitude toward him was very negative, and there was a big issue there. I had gone in assuming he was going to be hard to work for. I was focusing on all the negative aspects. I was complaining. Myself and my colleagues were always gossiping and complaining about him. So naturally, my experience was quite negative. And through this kind of reflection, I decided, look, I want to at least try and be a bit more loving and kind toward him, which absolutely was not where my thoughts were. At the very least, when I see him, can I smile? Can I ask him how he is? Can I just give him a chance and not carry all these assumptions and baggage into the situation, and just try and be a bit more caring, be a bit more loving in whatever form that would take. Just have that intention, if nothing else. And I found over the days and weeks that followed, initially it was quite challenging, but over time, I was able to slowly shift my perspective of how I saw him. Our relationship began to improve significantly, and I began to realize actually this manager of mine just really wanted to do a very, very good job for the client, and that desire to serve the client was what was driving them to find all these areas that our work could be better. What I once saw as an overly critical manager, I began to realize was someone who just wanted to do a really good job and wanted to enable me to become better and help them do that good job. And this fully shifted, how I perceived and related to the situation, to the point that I really began to enjoy work, and our relationship significantly improved. And it was this practice of kind of checking in daily about how am I feeling? Okay, I'm still feeling frustrated. That's okay. How am I doing today? Okay, I tried to at least be a bit more polite. How am I doing today? Well, this time when my colleagues started gossiping, I changed the conversation and made sure we didn't keep complaining about him, but talked about something else. And through these kind of daily check-ins and continuous kind of work on my own perception and belief and way I was showing up, the situation completely shifted. And I think without this kind of daily check-in, it would be much harder. This really is a space for me to take a step back, to go, why is my behavior this way and how do I really want it to be? And that's really been a game changer for many people, many situations, everything from experiencing peer pressure to big job decisions to difficult people to simply, new situations where I'm out of my comfort zone. This has been incredibly helpful. So the next and third step, which is kind of a natural progression from this step, is setting and monitoring goals. So from the areas of improvement, it's key to now have a couple of action points. Now, again, to my point earlier, rather than focusing on the 50 different things I could do better. I find for me it works just to pick 1 or 2 things. What are the 1 or 2 things I want to focus on? Maybe there's one that's health related, maybe there's one that's school related for me right now, maybe it's work related. In this context, with the example I just gave, my focus at the time was how do I be really, loving and kind and perceive my manager in a different way and kind of get rid of all the biases and negativity that I had toward him. So that was really the one focus at that point. And I find this kind of daily reflection is a nice point to check in on those goals, to check in on how I'm progressing, as kind of shared earlier, and then to change the goals if need be, change approaches if need be, if one approach is not working, and to keep kind of being conscious about what I'm doing and the impact it's having. And this, again, for small or big, I find really helpful. The key is just to be realistic. And initially I used to set, overly ambitious goals. When I wanted to wake up and have a good morning routine, it was wake up at 5, spend X number of minutes doing yoga and then go for a run and then meditate and then read and then watch a TED talk and then do this and then do this and then go to work. And it was just so much and it was unrealistic. And so starting small, the whole idea of under promise, over deliver, I think is key, and then building momentum. And this feeds in really nicely to that step 1 of celebrating the wins, setting small goals, hitting them, and then from that, building momentum to wake up a little bit earlier, and then a little bit earlier, then a little bit earlier, rather than kind of jumping to the 5 a.m. in the way that I initially was. So the next step, which I find super important and one of my favorite parts of the entire kind of nightly reflection process, step number 4, is gratitude. And this is really like having now thought about my day and done all this like hard work reflecting on what's working and what's not and how am I going to be different. It's a chance just to step back and really appreciate the beautiful parts of my day. What am I grateful for today that has happened? Who am I grateful, for today? And what gratitude can I even have toward my own self? I think that is a key and really beautiful part of this as well. And this could be the simplest things or the biggest things. Sometimes for me, it's simply right now in the UK where it's often cold and wet. I'm so grateful every time the sun comes out. I'm grateful for the simple interactions with friends. I'm grateful for the opportunity to study and to be in this incredible university environment where I can learn about so many things. I'm grateful just for the ability to have a functioning body. I'm grateful for the projects I get to engage with. So there's many things in that first bucket. In terms of people as well, I find it really nice to think about, friends, family, teachers, all those around me, even the difficult manager who I'm so grateful for, who taught me a lot about how to get rid of my own negativity. Taking time to even be grateful for those tough situations, I think can really be a gem in shifting our own perspective and enabling our own growth. So this is one of my favorite parts. I think it's helpful to think holistically, but also just from a day-to-day basis, what was it today? And then bigger picture as well, what are the things I'm grateful for? And people have asked me before, like, do you ever run out of things? If you're doing this every single day, surely you'll say everything once and then, I think every single day there is an endless amount of things to be grateful for. And even if it's the same thing that you want to acknowledge again, the feeling is more important than what you're saying. And if you can feel that sense of appreciation, of love, of gratitude in you, I think that's really what's most beautiful about this practice, and really enables myself to grow from it. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, gratitude has so many benefits, health-wise, mentally, emotionally, physically. One of my favorite quotes is actually, the more grateful you are, the more things you get to be grateful for. And I think it's this beautiful, positive reinforcing cycle where life just becomes more beautiful and more positive through this practice of gratitude. So even if it's just one thing, I find this is a really key and special part of the nightly reflection. So the fifth and final step of the daily reflection is taking a forward look on what's happening tomorrow. And this has a couple of elements. On a very practical side, it's just looking at my calendar and getting a sense of, what is it that I need to do tomorrow? Is it work? Do I have meetings, work-wise or school-wise? What's going on? If I haven't already planned my day, it's taking some time to just, put a couple of things in the calendar and get a sense of what my day is looking like. And then the third piece, which I totally love, which has been a real game changer for me, is setting intentions. Now, this could be one intention for the day, or it could be specific intentions for specific tasks. And in a way, this is kind of like a pre-reflection. So, for example, there was a point where I had a lot of schoolwork on, a few weeks ago, exams, everything was quite hectic, and I was noticing I was becoming a little bit more stressed by all the work that was going on, both inside of school and outside of school. So my intention was simply to step back and keep perspective. Like look up at the stars, remember how insignificant, how small I am, and just have perspective when things feel quite heavy. So that might just be an intention for the day. But equally, I'll often set intentions for specific tasks. So for example, recently I had to catch up with a friend who was going through a very hard time. And so my intention was simply, I want to listen well. I want to be present and listen really well and lend an ear. Maybe I'm going into a class that I know that I struggle to engage with because finance doesn't interest me, but it's important, that I learn. So my intention is going into finance tomorrow. I want to be really engaged and I want to really take the effort to learn as much as I can and appreciate this opportunity to even be in this class. And I find just by setting this intention beforehand, I'm already halfway there to actually showing up and being the kind of person I want to be. So that, I think, is one that I've found personally has been really, really helpful. And I'm conscious I've given you 5 steps, and there's quite a lot in there. I don't do all 5 of these every single day. I find some days it's 1 or 2 aspects that are more important. Over the course of the week, all 5 of these things will definitely show up. And there are some days where I'll, really work through all of them. But I really encourage you to not feel constrained or heavy or feel like, oh, there's all these things I need to do, but just pick out which aspects of these are most important and which aspects feel most helpful now. And there are some days where I just need a lot of self-compassion and let's just focus on the gratitude and what's going well. And there are some days where some big situation has happened that's been really challenging, and that's what I unpack for half an hour and don't spend as much time on the others. So I really want to share that this is kind of a process that I find helpful, but really feel free to treat it as a toolbox and pick and choose what you need and how you need in each moment as helpful. So the next piece I wanted to talk about really speaks to the foundations of where growth is coming from. And this has been a huge area for personal growth for me. And I think in essence, it's I am enough. Some of you might have joined a webinar a few weeks ago that Diogo, one of the other global changemakers, ran on this very topic. And I wanted to touch base and build on what he shared a little bit. I think what's interesting with reflection and growth, for me, my natural tendency is to be overly critical of myself. I've got this vision of who I could be that's quite idealistic. And it's very easy for me to be quite hard on myself and quite self-critical. And I notice this in my self-talk. The way I speak to myself, I'd never speak to anyone else. It could be as simple as waking up late and then getting frustrated at myself for not, using my morning more preciously and carefully. And so what I've found is it's really important for reflection and for growth to come from a place of self-acceptance and self-love, not from one of self-denial or overly self-criticalness. And this might seem like a bit of a paradox. And I remember, I think a couple of years ago, I was working with a coach at the time and unpacking this very idea of, growing in acceptance. And I realized at the time that I had a fear that if I accepted myself completely as I am, all my flaws, all my imperfections, I was scared that I would stop growing. And this fear was holding me back from fully accepting all of myself and really being self-compassionate. And this coach, she really encouraged me. She said, just experiment. Give yourself a week and just allow yourself to accept everything you do and just see what happens. I'm not saying change your behavior, but just experiment for a week. So for this next week, the next time I woke up late, I said, that's okay. That's all right. I'm not going to justify it. I'm not going to rationalize it. I'll accept it. The time I didn't listen so well in a conversation, that's okay. The time I got a bit angry, that's okay. Anytime something happened that I would normally be self-critical of, I just started, it was quite uncomfortable initially, just saying, that's okay. I accept myself. That's okay. That's all right. And let's not, keep being so critical. And basically what I realized was quite amazing. One, I felt much lighter and much more joyful and much happier. I found rather than feeling this weight and this burden of wanting to be someone and be better, which can feel quite heavy for me, there was a much greater sense of lightness. And the other surprising thing was I found the growth still happened. This part of me that wants to get better did not go away. The growth was happening, but it felt much freer and it flowed. And if anything, the growth perhaps was greater, but it didn't matter as much. Now, this is all from my experience. You may relate to it, you may not, but I guess the essence of this is I encourage you, one, If you relate to this feeling, just to experiment, because I found that was really helpful advice I received. Just give yourself a week to try being a new way. Try practicing self-acceptance if it's something that doesn't come as naturally to you and the way it doesn't come to me, and just see what happens. But I think self-acceptance and really acknowledging that we are enough, that we are perfect, that we are beautiful, that we are whole, that we are imperfectly perfect, as paradoxical as it may seem, I think is a really key and critical foundation for any kind of growth. And if you've got, again, questions on this, I'm conscious I've crammed a lot in a short amount of time. Feel free to save them for the end and drop them in the chat box as well. The other kind of more meta question I wanted to share with you that I found really helpful, this was given to me maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and I've never forgotten it, is this question of, am I acting out of fear or love? And when it comes to reflecting, particularly on bigger life decisions or bigger life choices, I found this question has been super helpful to get a sense of what's really motivating me in this situation. I've been in multiple situations where I could have stayed in a stable, secure job or made a leap into a job that I really wanted that was very unstructured and uncertain and risky. And in these kinds of contexts, whether it's a job decision, moving countries, any kind of life choice, that can feel quite big. I find this question woven into my daily practice has been really helpful to get a sense of what's motivating me. If it's fear, that's okay. The fear probably has some valid roots, so let's acknowledge that. And if we want, if there's a fear that's very valid, saying, look, you're not going to be able to support yourself, don't do it, that's fine, but let's be intentional. Rather than have fear kind of drive us. I've noticed, for example, if I think about even an example, this year, so I'm completing my MBA and I've been exploring different job opportunities, and a number of opportunities have opened up, and I've gone through interviews and spoken to companies and come out of these conversations thinking, wow, I could really see myself doing this. This seems really great, and felt excited. And then later on, when I've reflected, realized actually what's exciting me about this is not so much the work, more the fact that it's stable and certain and easy. And the kind of work I really want to pursue, shifting businesses and mindsets, is unclear and it's uncharted. But it's this fear of that uncertainty that has pushed me to go, maybe the stable job is what I want. And through this reflective practice, it's been really key for me, rather than pursuing a job that I don't really want, to realize actually it's fear that's motivating me. I don't want it to motivate me. Fortunately, I'm in a place where I can take leaps and jumps and take risks. It's quite, I'm quite grateful to be in that place, and therefore I want to not be driven by this fear. So just always holding this question out when it comes to decisions, whether small or big, what's really driving me? Is it fear? Is it insecurity? Is it wanting to please others? Is it wanting to please society? Is it wanting to meet some external measure of success? Or is this really what I really want? Is this deeply what motivates me? Is this deeply what matters to me? And again, the funeral activity / the 80th birthday activity can be a nice way to reconnect with what it is that we really want. So the final piece I wanted to touch on before some Q&A is thinking a bit about how do we apply this practice to working with teams and projects. So what I found from my experience working with different teams and in different teams is a lot of teams are really good at tracking the main project goals. What are we hitting our sales targets? Are we reaching as many people as we want with our environmental campaign? What is the kind of impact we're having? How do we increase that? And it's hard to do, but there's a lot of attention and energy that's put on that. And I think that's typically done quite well by a lot of teams and organizations, or at least, it's a priority. The second piece here is something that I've seen in some teams, but not in a lot of teams. And it's this idea of, after specific activities or tasks, taking time to reflect on how we were and how we could be better. It could be as simple as coming out of a meeting and questioning, how effective was that meeting? Did everyone need to be there? Was the agenda right? Did I give the adequate pre-materials? Did we get to a resolution quickly? Could I have facilitated the conversation better? And just taking time out of after specific tasks to reflect individually, as well as to get feedback from those that were in that environment, I find is so, so, so helpful. Because the reality is, every single thing we do every day, we can do better. And I don't want us to feel overwhelmed by, I need to improve in all the things, and I need to, get better in every aspect of my life. But even building it as a habit to just regularly ask feedback and spending just 30 seconds or a minute maybe I've had a hiring conversation about bringing someone on the team. How did that conversation go? What could have been better? Could I have asked another question? Did I respond well? Was I listening? Just having this constant kind of reflection as a habit after tasks, I find really, really helpful, and something that I haven't seen as often. But the third piece, which I perhaps find the most rare, is teams that are actively asking questions and reflecting on how they're personally showing up in these environments, taking time to acknowledge what are the strengths that we're seeing in one another, what are the areas for growth we're seeing in one another, how socially and environmentally conscious are we as individuals. I don't know, many of you, particularly the Global Changemakers crew, come from backgrounds where you're running social enterprises or running campaigns or projects in this space. And I know some organizations are brilliant at this and really make sure they live and breathe their values. But there've been a good number of organizations I've been in or worked with where we're putting outside this vision of, wanting a sustainable society and a healthy society, but overworking ourselves, but not actually, being conscious about how we're traveling, or how much energy we're consuming, or the kind of lives we're living. And I think that is something that I think is so important. If you're putting out this external vision, it's important that you live it yourself and at least create space to ask this. I spent some time in India working with an organization called Better World Ed that was phenomenal at this. And they're really the people I'd give credit for my own learning in this, where every day, every week, every month, as a team, we would reflect, what assumptions am I holding about the people I'm interacting with? What are the negative self-limiting beliefs that I'm holding about myself, and how can my team members help me overcome them? How well are we really working as a team? What does that look like through our activities? And really just having the intention and setting aside some space, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, to really reflect on ourselves as individuals in the context of work with our colleagues so that we can support each other and work through this, I think is super critical and super important, and something that I've not experienced in many places, but when it has been done has been really phenomenal. And I think, just to close up on this, our ability to have the impact we want to have on the world, on the complex issues we're facing, is directly correlated with who we are and our own personal learning and growth. And the more grounded, the more loving, the more kind, the more self-aware, the more effective we are at the skills we're developing, the greater the impact we can have and the greater contribution we can make. And so for me, going back to the whole Global Changemakers mission of wanting to have a positive impact on the world, I really think this is a core foundational aspect of wanting to do that and wanting to be that, and a real personal non-negotiable in doing this kind of work. But I think, again, applies to anyone in whatever kind of work you're doing. So that comes up to the end of our planned time, and I'd love to create some space for some Q&A. So feel free to jump into the chat box and share some questions. It could be about anything that we've covered, or anything out of scope that we haven't talked about as well. And aside from questions, feel free to also type in comments you might have, maybe your own practices, your own tips and tools. It's really quite an open space, and we'll kind of give ourselves the next 10, 12 minutes before wrapping up, 10, 15 minutes just to explore some questions together and have some space to think through that. Yeah, I'm sure many of you have some fantastic questions, and let me actually stop screen sharing. Hey, hope you can see me. I'm sure many of you have fantastic insights, so we'd love to hear your personal insights as well, because I'm sure there are many of you that are quite reflective and would have plenty to add to the conversation as well. We've got a comment from Courtney to kick us off. I've been meaning to start a gratitude journal, but can never seem to get it started. I can't seem to figure out why, I just can't do it. I think it's an interesting point, Courtney, and I think with a lot of change efforts, often, you think about New Year's resolutions, we set intentions, but then when it comes to acting, it's really hard. I think what I would encourage in these kinds of cases is really to sit back and question what's holding me back from starting. And often I think just taking the first step is the way I find I build momentum and get going. So it could just be one day sitting down and writing the first piece of gratitude. And then through that feeling and through that experience and through enjoying the benefits of it, I think the motivation and momentum will build to keep going. I think for any habit, as you guys will know, it takes 21 days to set up a habit. So it's going to take time and it's going to take discipline, and it's easy to keep doing what we've always done, and it takes real conscious effort to bring in new habits. So if you can persevere through that first period, and maybe there's peers that can help you keep you in check, or there's some incentives, or you can find ways to push through that first period, I think that's when these things become habits, and then it's really quite hard to let go of them at all. We've got another question from Jiminy T. Thanks, Shruthi. How do you manage the negative self-talk in dealing with your reflections? Or how do you deal with it if the reflections you are uncovering are difficult? How do you manage negative self-talk in dealing with your reflection? And how do you deal with it if the reflections... I think this is a really tough one. And I think for me, I found this hard because I've spent so many years in this with a lot of overly critical self-talk toward myself. So to change that, it's going to take a lot of reprogramming and a lot of wiring. So in the spirit of compassion, even being compassionate about ourselves for having negative self-talk and not being overly critical even about that, I think is a starting point. And knowing that it's going to take time to change helps. One thing a friend told me once, which I found really helpful, is imagine when you're speaking to yourself, a little child in there. And how would you speak to that little child? Imagine Shruthi is this little child. What's the kind of language I would use? Or put someone in there that you think is someone who you really want to nurture and you want to cultivate. How would you speak to them? And even having that visual helps me reframe how I can speak to myself. If I think of myself as a little child, I would never get angry or frustrated or be overly negative, but I'd rather be very encouraging. So that's another kind of tool that I found helpful in reframing kind of negative self-talk. But I think the biggest thing is just being compassionate. Having the intention to change, I think, is really powerful, and then continuously working at it and just noticing when it happens. And the more I find I can notice and just be conscious of when I'm being negative and step out of being the one that's talking to the one that's noticing myself be negative. So just practicing a little bit of mindfulness in that activity, that is quite a powerful tool just to distance myself. And then eventually through that, I found it's quietened. But very much, I'm still a work in progress. So that's just how I've worked on it so far. But again, welcome any thoughts or insights that others may have on this question as well. It's a great question. Can you please explain mindfulness a little? Yeah, in a nutshell, I think, again, there's probably many different definitions, but for me, it's about being conscious and aware of what's going on in me and around me. So often we hear mindfulness and meditation used together, and I find meditating and taking even just time to breathe quite consciously and intentionally and notice my breath is a nice way to be quite present and to move from being the one that's reacting to the one that's observing. And I find those are two different ways of experiencing life. Again, this might feel quite abstract, and I think it's best experienced. I don't think it's something that's as easy to talk about and something I'd happily share more information with after this. But I think for me, the essence of it is being conscious and being intentional and noticing without judgment, without being self-critical, without associating meanings, what is going on in me and around me. And from that place of awareness, I think a lot of beautiful change can happen. Any other questions, ideas, insights, tools? Maybe there are certain questions that you find really helpful in your reflection that you can share with the group. Feel free to drop them in the chat box. From Simon, what do you think of a guided meditation on YouTube? Do you do this? Have you tried doing it? There are many forms of meditation out there and many guided versions on YouTube. Personally, I was fortunate to grow up with a few practices and have just kind of practiced those personally and haven't really relied on YouTube as much. The two kind of foundational practices I use, one is just on focusing on the breath and watching the breath, and the other one is the visualization based on light. We basically visualize this light of love and see it traveling through the body and then expanding to fill the entire world. And it's kind of a nice loving kindness kind of practice. So those are the practices I personally use and I found really helpful and happy offline. You can drop me an email to share more information about those or to share recordings on those as well. I think there's plenty online. I haven't tried the ones on YouTube, but I definitely can speak really highly of meditation practice, and that, meditating daily, I think, like reflecting, is another core part of my daily practice and really helps me be better and do better. So can definitely recommend meditation as a whole. We have another question here from Raghav. At times one feels left behind when one's working and studying while peers are progressing more. This can cause stress and self-criticism. How do we break this cycle of self-comparison using reflection? Brilliant question, Raghav. So sometimes we feel behind while peers are progressing more because we're comparing ourselves to others, which can cause stress and self-criticism. How do we break the cycle? For me, the essence of this, Raghav, again, there'll be many, many great answers, but my take on it would be, I think, to break this cycle, if I think about my own life, where I've pursued a lot of things that my peers haven't done. And I've, whilst I could say many peers since university have accumulated X number of wealth and are now buying houses and now settling down and have progressed quite high in their career, I've kind of jumped around. So easy to fall into this package of comparison. But what I found has helped me is really, one, working on my own self-confidence and really being intentional and feeling good about the life I'm living. And that's where the sense of thinking about what really matters at the end of the day. And if I feel like I'm living in alignment with that, in that comes a really deep sense of groundedness and a real sense of confidence as well. One of my favorite quotes is from Stephen Covey, where he says, "Many of us are so busy climbing the ladder that we get to the top and then realize the ladder is leaning against the wrong building." And I think it's just so profound, because I find comparing can make me start climbing up these wrong buildings, thinking I need to do what my peers are doing. And maybe that is what I want. But I think through reflection, I can really anchor on what really matters to me, and am I living a life that really aligns with what's important to me? And through that, I'll find that the comparison just falls away or becomes much weaker. We've got a question from Audrey, all hail for Audrey Hepburn. How can you self-reflect when you have a negative mindset? It's hard for me personally to self-reflect when I'm clouded by negative thoughts about my mistakes, failures, and incompetencies. I feel you, Audrey Hepburn. This is tough. I think it just starts with small steps and practicing, I guess, two thoughts. One, I think meditation and mindfulness can be helpful to become more conscious of those negative thoughts, similar to what we had shared earlier, and to realize that they're there and that they're not serving us. And then I think the second piece is slowly and surely replacing them with more positive thoughts. Gratitude, I think, is a really powerful tool here to instill a more positive mindset. That early reflection question on, what's going well, and I think asking more of those questions can help us slowly shift our thoughts and our beliefs. It'll take time. It's not going to be easy. I think the world we live in is one that's very negative, where it's easy to fall into the self-critical and negative mindset towards self. But I think taking small steps and really spending time to acknowledge, what am I doing well? What is going well? What am I grateful for? Can slowly begin reprogramming things in our head and taking us into a more positive mindset, which can help with this as well. Again, I really welcome others to share thoughts. These are brilliant questions, and I'm sure you've got insights on them as well. Sydney Hayes asks us, I can really relate to working for an NGO that is driven to create positive change externally, but fails to have a positive impact internally, specifically when it comes to team dynamics. Yeah, I definitely feel you, Sydney. Is it possible for one person to create change when it comes to team reflection, or is organizational alignment needed to implement these processes? I think it's both and. So I've been in organizations where I've been the person that's come and said, look, we need to reflect more as a team. So with an organization I was with in New Zealand more recently, we have team retreats, a few times a year, and there've been spaces at those where I've led conversations and facilitated conversations on really reflecting on who we are, how we're showing up as a team, created spaces for us to share positive and constructive feedback with each other. So that's something that I've brought to the team, which has been helpful. And I think each of us have the power to do that in the environments that we're in. So absolutely, I think one person can start it and can drive it, and it needs leadership. But at the same time, I think to really shift a culture and make this part of an organization, you absolutely need alignment and support from the top to make this happen. And so if I think about the organization that I was with in India, where I really learned a lot of this, the guy running, he wouldn't even call himself a CEO, he's too humble, but the guy running the organization was living and breathing this completely, and a real example, and really pushed us to create spaces and made that part of our day and part of our routine and part of our processes. And that made our culture one of real deep personal learning and growth and reflection. So I think absolutely we'll need both, starting with ourselves is a helpful place, and showing our teams the impact this can have, but ultimately getting buy-in from the top and institutionalizing this in different ways, I think is really going to be key to shift culture and really embed it into culture as well. If so, where would you recommend starting? Because I feel like some of these tools are so deeply needed to improve organization culture. I guess, building on what I had shared, I think really starting with ourselves in the direct teams we're in and influencing those directly around us, I think is the easiest place to start. But absolutely, if you can, spend time with, leadership and share with them the benefits of this and your thoughts on it and get their buy-in, I think that's when you're in the best position to then have the mandate to really bring people on board. But really, I think starting with us, happy to take this offline as well and can share more, Sydney, on kind of specific tools that I found more helpful in an organizational context. I think it's also worth noting that many people just may be uncomfortable with it or new to it and not so, can feel quite vulnerable as well, sharing this with others. Many of us are quite reflective and probably do it all the time, but for me, it was important to realize some people just don't ask these questions and don't share them. And so I think in terms of starting, really important to understand the context and the situation really well, to understand where people are at. Are there people already doing this that could be your kind of allies and really help you do this? Are there people that are very resistant to it? Are people wanting it or not wanting it? If everyone is resisting it, it's going to be really hard. But if there's a general desire for it, if people want direction, again, the approach would be different. So I think in terms of starting, understanding the situation really well, where this has it been there historically, how people are individually, and at least in terms of the key stakeholders, can be really useful kind of foundation to then think about how do you best act and move forward from where you are as well. But brilliant question. We have a couple of minutes left, so if anyone's got any concluding questions or thoughts, please do share them. We've got from Venkat, the other 4 facets of self-reflection you shared will help address the negative mindset. Yeah, great point. Guys are asking some brilliant questions. Great. We'll wrap it up shortly. We'll see Venkat's final point, and then we'll wrap it up. Also, reflecting to someone else, e.g. writing a letter to the one you love the most, who may never read it, helps us see the negative thoughts and self-loathing in a different light. Yeah, it's a beautiful point, actually. It's a great tip. Reflecting to others and recognizing how we speak to others, and that will change things. I mean, we can't speak to others in the way we speak to ourselves. So that's brilliant. So we will wrap it up in a moment. Thank you so much for joining. Firstly, to the Global Changemakers Network for creating this opportunity. I've loved reflecting on how I reflect and trying to, create a bit of a framework around it and package it. And it's helped me deepen my own practice as well in the last little while as I've been working on this. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all for joining, for your wonderful questions and comments. I can leave my email in the chat box, so if you've got questions or want to continue the conversation, more than happy to do so. We can also see if we can get the slides emailed to all of you if you'd like them, so we can arrange for that as well. And all the very best in practicing self-love, self-appreciation, positive, beautiful reflection, and hopefully leading to endless amounts of positive growth for all of us. Thank you so much. I will just drop you my email here, and then we will close it up. Thank you once again. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, night. Thank you for those that have joined from the middle of the night. I know a few of you have. Appreciate all the love, and hope to see you again sometime soon.